Hello, everybody. If I could direct your attention to the stage, please. Hi, I'm Cassie. I'll be the host introducing the transitions between all of the panels and events that we have going on today for TPVR 2025 Day 2. And it's going to be quite a lovely time. I hope you all enjoy. We've got a whole set of beautiful and wonderful panels hosted by none other than our amazing community members across both the Academy and other various communities, sharing their talents, sharing their perspectives, and sharing themselves with you today. So, first and foremost, we're going to be starting off the events with a panel from none other than our amazing and wonderful voice team. Professor Savvy and Professor Jessa will be sharing some insights about their works as vocal coaches and providing the lessons that they give to us all in the Academy each and every week. This panel will be hosted and moderated by none other than the lovely V, aka Purpose Unknown. So if I could go ahead and introduce them all onto stage and they can get nice and comfy. Come on up, you three.
Oh, cheers.
Hello.
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 Where do I sit?
Hello.
I'd sit. I mean, I'm okay to stand. We stood last time.
Yeah, I'm standing.
Yeah, I'm fine to stand.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll stand. Well, welcome everyone to TPVR Day 2. Oh man, we got a lot of exciting panels and stuff today. But we figured we would start with introducing and having a discussion with our lovely voice coaches, which if you were here, say 15, 20 minutes ago, you caught the end of our lovely Professor Savvy's voice modulation workshop. So I think there's enough of the audience that knows the two of you that I don't necessarily think you need an introduction, but if you don't mind just telling a little bit about yourselves and what you do here for the Academy and whatnot, feel free.
Yeah, sure. Want me to go first?
Yeah, you can go first. Probably makes more sense.
All right. Some of your faces I do recognize already. You've been at the workshop that just happened a few minutes ago. But hey, for those who don't already know me, I'm Savvy. I am a teacher here at the Trans Academy. And so I do workshops every Sunday on this very stage in some group classes. So yeah, you're welcome to join in if you have never done any voice work before, if you want to learn how to feminize, masculinize, and Jessa does the same. So I'll just let her tell you all about it.
Hi, everybody. A lot of you probably know my face as well. My name is Jess. I've been a voice coach here with the Academy for God, what is it? Almost 2 years at this point now? Something like that. 2.5. I don't know. Losing track of time. I've been a voice coach for about 4 years myself. I'm currently studying my undergrad degree. I'm doing a Bachelor of Science in Linguistics with honors, as well as a minor in psychology with aspirations of going on to study speech pathology. So doing a Master of Science in that. But in the meantime, I am just doing a lot of voice work here. I also do a lot of volunteering locally in my community. So I do work with both an aphasia recovery clinic and in a school for helping children who have sort of speech abnormalities and that sort of stuff. So quite a broad range of voice topics that I work in. But obviously, as a trans person myself, this is what I do most. It's what I do best, and it's what I like teaching the most. So yeah, that's probably enough about me.
Fantastic, yeah. So we figured we would take this panel to get to know our vocal coaches and instructors a little bit more. So I have a variety of different questions, if you don't mind answering. To kind of start off, obviously you've mentioned Jessa, you're studying voice, studying linguistics, and Savvy, you, among other things, teach beatboxing, and I think you mentioned at the workshop, you've been doing voice work for 7 to 8 years, right?
I've been doing 7 to 8 years on my own, but professionally 5 years. So it's about that time frame. Yeah.
Getcha. I kind of wanted to, and I figured the audience could maybe inquire or even relate to it, but what was your personal vocal journey in finding your voice and how it relates or maybe doesn't relate the work you both do?
Oh wow, finding my voice. I mean, gendered wise, or just finding my voice. It's more, more of a metaphor. No, it took me a while. I think it. I think for a lot of people, and that was the case for me. It's something that was also very heavily linked to my transition and very psychologically heavy of something to live. I know some people are more like less afraid, or and there's no like bad thing about being afraid of using your voice and feeling dysphoria in regards to that, but that's what I was at. Like, I started voice training because it was the first thing I could change about my like gender representation, and so that's what I did. And so I think there was a big part of my ego in there, because I was like, I beatbox, I do this crazy, but yet I can't do a femme voice. It felt, very difficult. It was like a very low time of my life, and voice really uplifted me. So it's something that has built me as who I am today. It has, provided me work as a coach online. I have done these lessons initially for free, and people are like, you're helping a lot of people. You should, get, some recognition and some money for that. I'm like, okay, wow. And so that's what I started to do. And so I've been able to follow lessons from many coaches in the online sphere, namely Ziana from Trans Voice Lessons, also Celine, Clover as well. So a lot of different people from different communities, knowing the do's and don'ts, because there's a lot of don'ts when it comes to voice. So yeah, without getting too technical and too professional, just when it comes down to me, voice is at the end of the day, something that is very important. If I lost my voice tomorrow, I don't know if life would be worth living. Of course it would be worth living, but it's a big thing. It's a big thing for me, and I dare say it's also a huge thing for Jessa.
Yeah, so I had a similar sort of path with voice. When I first finally admitted to myself that I was trans, I'd kind of made a pact with myself that I would only actually come out if I could get my voice to a point where I felt like it was, up to my own standards. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And so I was like, if I can't get that to happen, then like, I'm just not going to do it. So voice was the first thing I had worked on as well. And within about a month, I'd had a voice that had started to pass in public. And I was like, well, if I can do that now, then like, I'm just going to go for it. And then I just full sent. And then from there, I just kept working on it, refining it, making it something that I actually wanted it to sound like, because at the start, it did not actually sound like how I envisioned my voice sounding. It sounded good enough to pass, but not good enough for me to feel like it was my voice. So I didn't finish refining it probably until like, I don't know, maybe like 8 to 12 months into it. And at that point, my voice had developed a lot, and I'd become a lot more aware of what's going on physiologically with it. And I had a lot of friends who were starting to ask me about, like, how do I learn to do this? Because you did it really well. And then it just kind of spiraled into teaching from there. I also had decided at that point, like, the province I live in Canada, British Columbia, they have a free voice training program that's offered called the Changing Keys program. And I was like, well, I'm teaching this now. I should like sign up to this program and see if I can like maybe glean a bit of additional information out of this. And I learned that voice pedagogy in the speech and language pathology field tends to lag behind quite a bit, because while we now know within our community, the trans community, that vocal tract size has a profound impact on the voice, as does something like vocal fold mass and that sort of stuff. The speech pathologists out there tend to still mostly emphasize pitch, unless you get like a really lucky, currently like cutting edge speech pathologist. And unfortunately, the program that I had signed into was one of those ones that is lagging behind and really emphasizing pitch. And so then I realized, like, okay, there is a lack within my community here in this province. So I've reached out to the program. I was like, hey, I'm a voice coach myself, actually. I just took this program and I feel like there's a lot that could be done to better it. And they said, yeah, but you're not a speech pathologist, so we don't trust that you actually know what you're talking about. And so I said, bet. And that's why I'm studying to become a speech pathologist.
And you do great.
My end goal is to be able to infiltrate that program and destroy it from the bottom up and reshape it in my own image. just because it's so nice that we have an access to like a program like that locally. It just sucks that it's not up to snuff with what we currently understand as being beneficial, and it's really a shame that they don't take that inside community understanding and perspective, and that they want that degree, because as we all know in this day and age, degrees do not equal education, right? You can get educated in any way beyond getting a piece of paper, but alas, I have to get that piece of paper.
Very much can't destroy the system from the outside, so you're going to sneak in and infiltrate, as you said.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And that brings up an interesting point. I kind of, you've mentioned you're very frustrated with certain areas of teaching currently. And Savvy, you mentioned there are many like don'ts when it comes to areas of voice. Is there, say, like, if you had to pick, say, like one, is there any like one technique or area within voice training where you just want to it's a myth, kick it down the road like it needs to die type of thing?
If there only was
one.
Exactly. If there only was one. There's too many myths out there. I think there is the most prevalent one, which is like swallow and hold, because people want to find a brighter sound, bring the height of the larynx, higher, bring the height higher. Very, very good wording here. Through swallowing, because swallowing has a tendency to bring that, but it also kind of clenches everything, because when you swallow, you're meant to, put things in your stomach. So problem is when you want to use your voice, you got to breathe out. And so when you swallow, it's actually kind of interacting with that. So pretty horrible thing, but it's far from being the only misconception. We're not helped by the fact that, as Jessa said, the institution, when it comes to speech and language pathology, really lags behind. They might do wonders when it comes to like helping with like aphasia, or like with puberphonia, or like with re-education post-surgery, because that's what they're trained to do. But it seems like trans voices are not their priority. And Jessa here is making sure it becomes a priority, hopefully someday. So yeah, thank you, Jessa. Maybe you want to like kill another voice myth for me, please.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it's not even a myth that is my biggest pet peeve. My biggest pet peeve is kind of just like, and posturing as being a coach, that sort of stuff, if you don't have like any sort of background in it, because to what I was saying earlier, how you don't need an education, that is true, but it does get blurry sometimes, right? There's a lot of people, because our community is so small, some people will find a voice and they really want to be able to help other people find their voice. They come from the best intentions, but they just don't really understand what they've done to achieve it, and so they're just trying to help people, but they're accidentally spreading misinformation or spreading information that's just like not exactly on the nose or not 100% there, right? That sort of thing is what I find the most challenging, because especially in today's day and age where we have like influencers and that sort of stuff, where we get like really big names really quickly, and people just attribute like a sense of prestige to those big names, large subscriber counts, that sort of stuff. It's really easy for someone to kind of position themselves as an authority on something when they don't really have the experience necessary. That's kind of my biggest thing with it. Second biggest is probably what you were saying with SLPs. It's such a minefield out there with people just lagging behind in information, and it's both pretty much the exact same thing, right? Just polar opposites. Somebody who has like a pedigree, they've got that experience, that degree, and that therefore they feel like they are an authority on the subject, and then somebody else who might be positioned as an authority for having like that sort of platform, but really neither of them might know exactly what's going on and might not be the best suited to be teaching the topics. That's kind of where my biggest thing is. It's not really a specific exercise or something, but just like the general sense of where we get our information from as a community and as a collective.
Prevalence of disinformation and misinformation, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder sometimes too, I feel like not just necessarily misinformation, but mixed information. And I was a little curious about, say, crossover with kind of tangentially related fields. As an example, like I've heard it myself, seeing a couple people come to like the voice workshops, and I'm sure both of you have too. People come in and they're coming at it from, say, either like a voice acting or a singing approach. And I'm curious, like, what similarities, what differences there are in those areas relative to voice training. Like, Jessa, I know you do some degree of music, singing and recording yourself. And Savvy, you do beatboxing. So, I'm curious, like, the level of crossover, like, what's relevant between those areas, what's different, misconceptions people may have between them, that type of stuff.
So, okay, I like the idea that you brought up beatboxing because, again, as I said before, when I first tried to feminize my voice, I was like super self-confident. When I started, doing like fem voice work, I already had like 5 years of beatboxing behind me. So I was kind of like, I know what I'm doing, And then I learned that I don't know what I'm doing. But it's strange, right? Because you might be able to perform really well, but just because you perform well doesn't mean that you know how to explain properly, and to transmit the information is very different than to do the thing properly, right? So, if I am a beatboxer and I might not teach as well as someone who maybe just does, right? And so I think a lot of people who like get that platform and who teach voice and they're like, they got really great voices. That's not the problem. But people will just be like, yeah, because they have a great voice, I gotta get a lesson with that person, And it's like, but what pedagogy, what exercises are behind it? And talking about the overlap, I'll talk about what I know a little bit of like classical singing, for example. There's like terminology like falsetto or chest voice, and a lot of classical singing is very unscientific to the point where like where classical singers have like pushed vocal science, and it's like vocal science like, well, it's actually not the way we thought it was. So like a lot has changed. Voice is always evolving every day, at least the study of it does. But yeah, like there's like a huge misconception, and it's like, okay, if you use your voice for singing, you might have something that comes more from like the art side, and so you might not want to be as, I suppose, professional. I mean, like, I guess it's more artistic, so there's like less of like a level to reach, right? And I wanted to get like to like sympathetic vibrations, or a lot of what classical singing has brought into and also into SLPs. Actually, maybe you know how to talk about this better, like how classical singing is so intertwined with SLPs. Why is that? Like, it's so weird.
Yeah, it really has to do with the way that the education system functions, right? Like, you think about like higher education, when you go into a university to learn to sing, they don't teach contemporary singing, they teach classical singing. And so when you're in that environment and you're also learning like speech, you're going to get that sort of bleed into the speech program, through the classical field, right? Because again, there's like a lack of contemporary singing that's instructed in universities. So it's just that natural byproduct of like close proximity that draws that together, which is why you still have SLPs using terminology like head voice and chest voice and looking for vibrations and stuff, when we now know that that's not really a good way of approaching it. Yeah.
Yeah, and whilst it may be like, I suppose it could be good for you on like a personal level, but I don't share the same body as you. So if I have to go off vibrations in my face, in my chest, in my nose, these might be extremely different from one individual to another. And also, we're not really taught how to perceive vibration. It's not exactly a sense we have, I guess. So it's very nebulous. There's a lot of like, you got to do this and that. It's like you can, swim in all of this mess for years without ever evolving, because it's just confusing, and they're just trying to transpose what works for them to others. But we do know with our methodology that this is not how it works. We have very different bodies, so we got to go on a sound first approach rather than one that will require you to feel vibrations in your face and whatnot,
Yeah.
So yeah,
For
sorry,
my
that was a
part
lengthy.
there.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
My bad. Yeah, go. Sorry.
No. For my part there, I'd like Unknown was saying, V, I don't really have like a background background in beatboxing, but I do have a background in singing. So much like Savvy has extensive experience with beatboxing, I've been singing for the better part of my life. I started singing in choirs when I was like, I think I must have been like 3 or 4. I was young. So it's been almost 30 years of singing because I just turned 29 a few weeks ago. So a long, long time of that. And I had a similar sort of pathway where it was like, I had that background. I thought I knew what I was doing. And then when I started to learn voice, like from a speaking perspective, I was like, oh my God, I have no clue what's going on. So it's just like that slow kind of delving into it. The biggest thing that I find with like a potential crossover between singing and speaking, though, is that if someone does have some sort of prior singing experience, they do tend to have a little bit of an easier time learning to feminize or learning to masculinize or learning to androgynize, whatever it may be. And that just usually comes down to having a better ear for pitch discrimination, right? Like being able to differentiate whether or not like which one of those two is the higher or lower tone, right? In that example, it was the latter one. The latter was lower versus something like this. If you have not maybe the best pitch discrimination, you might have heard that last one as once again being the lower tone, but that time they were actually the same pitch. The difference was that we would have like lower formant frequencies, lower resonance, right? There's a lower sort of darker quality to that secondary one. All right, we can hear that. So just a slightly darker sound, but it's not actually a different pitch. That would be a different pitch. And singers tend to be really good at picking up on that stuff, whereas someone who's brand new to voice, they might not quite be there yet. It's something that you can easily develop. So it's really not like a horrible thing if you don't have that skill, but singers tend to have that, predisposition, and that just makes it a little bit easier. The inverse is not really necessarily true, though, in that like being a singer means you should practice singing first and then talking. It's usually still a good idea to practice talking first, and that's a common first misstep I see a lot of the time is someone will be like, I can already sing really well, so that means that I should start by practicing singing. But really the muscles involved in singing are the same as speech, but usually a little bit more fully involved or fully engaged. It's easier to approach it from a speech first, singing second perspective, just because it's, less intense. We need to engage a lot more and have a lot more focus in our voice and our bodies when we're singing than when we're talking. So it's really easy to just kind of like overthink stuff or accidentally tighten things in ways we shouldn't be if we're trying to just jump right into singing. That's kind of what I would say answers that question.
It makes sense. In talking about the crossover between various fields involving the voice, and especially, the prior question emphasizing myths or things that we need to, kick the bucket, for lack of a better term. Are there components within voice that you would say are underrated when it comes to vocal training? Jessa, I know you definitely emphasize the importance of whether feminizing or masculinizing, like practice on both ends of that spectrum for vocal training. Are there any other like areas that you think, contrast to what, needs to die, underrated areas that should be emphasized more?
Yeah, definitely that, compare and contrast analysis sort of perspective. I think we can really get in our heads about like centering a goal voice. Like if we're doing, for example, voice masculinization, it can be really easy to not want to be using a feminine voice, right? Usually that has to do with some form of dysphoria or, that sort of stuff. But it's really worthwhile to try and fight through that dysphoria to gain a better understanding of the differences rather than just trying to focus in on that goal sound. Because if we do play around with both spectrums here, we're going to have a better chance of being able to differentiate the sound, right? Let's say, for example, if I'm starting in kind of like this mid-range androgynous voice, like if that's my default position there, and I'm trying to feminize this, right? There's really not a huge difference between those two voices.
But if I let my voice come down to here, for example, for a second, well, now there's a relatively large difference
between that and this. There's differences in pitch, vocal weight, and resonance at that point, right? The size of my voice or vocal tract. So by scaling it that way and allowing my voice to have that broader sort of difference between them, I'm then going to be able to hear the change and the transition a lot more cleanly. I can play around with the different aspects more fluidly. Than if I was starting here where my vocal weight and my pitch are already really good and the only thing that needs to change is like a slight resonance bump, right? It makes it a lot easier when you're first starting to try and explore the whole continuity of voice, right? Play around with it, because it's not just two voices. We've got a whole host of voices that we can produce, right? Just by comparing the differences between like resonance and size against like vocal weight, right? There's basically 4 different distinct voice qualities we can produce there. So play around with all of them. Yeah, Savvy, do you have anything?
I mean, you took the voice as the global thing, right? For those who don't know about voice training, I suppose what I would say is a lot of us are kind of attuned to pitch, right? We know the difference between la 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 la, but we don't necessarily know the difference between ah, oh, ah, right? A warp in resonance or vocal tract size. And so this is generally what the public doesn't know about, what they don't want you to know about, right? It's, that change of vocal tract size, kind of like going between like a guitar that's really big of an instrument to like a ukulele, which is like a much smaller instrument. And so you'll hear that the strings being strummed will yield a brighter sound when you have a smaller body, a smaller resonance chamber. And we are like an instrument. We also have a resonance chamber that we can warp and change and modulate. So that's what I would say. But what Jessa said is extremely important. You want to take voice as a whole. You might feel tempted to go one quality at a time. It's something I sometimes teach. It depends on the situation. You kind of have a lot of variables at once. And you have a background in singing. I have a background in beatboxing and a bit of voice acting. And so because of that background, we are attuned to voices and to musicality, so to pitches and all that stuff. So for us, it's much easier because like da 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 scales make sense. But like they make sense to a point where they're like a back process in our mind. A lot of people here aren't that invested in music or voice acting or singing or anything like that. And so taking it one step at a time, it can be good. So I suppose for different people, different kind of different types of methods are going to apply. But yeah, generally, if you know already about voice and you don't know what you could change, look into resonance, look into the vocal tract size mostly. And if you're a bit more advanced and resonance is easier for you, definitely work on everything at once. Take the voice as a whole, because you never really have the vocal tract size isolated from the vocals. I can't, take the vocal folds out of your vocal tract. That's not going to happen, right? So nothing works in isolation in that regard. So yeah. I think that does cover it pretty well.
Yeah. And I'd be curious too, because Jessa, you mentioned like the struggles people have with like a goal voice in mind and trying to get them to explore their range. What does that look like in like teaching practice? Like Savvy, for example, if someone comes to you and they're like, I want to sound like X, and they're just like hard, steadfast on that goal. Like, how do you kind of work with and or encourage them to like come into their own voice instead of, be so like laser focused on a goal voice?
You would be surprised. It's actually a lot more 50-50 than you think. A lot of people just come to me and are like, I just want to sound femme, But behind I just want to sound femme or I just want to sound masc, there's always like expectations of what a masc voice or a femme voice sounds like or is supposed to sound like. And I think if we don't address that, that person is always going to be frustrated with their voices. So, I have to preface like, hey, voice is a spectrum, and even within the 2 blocks, masc, femme, no in between, because wow, it totally doesn't exist. Of course it does. You'll have a really femme voice, a slightly less femme voice, a slightly less femme voice, a slightly less femme voice. I would consider all of these voices feminine, right? The same way that
I would consider this one really masculine. I'd still consider this one masculine. I'd still consider this one
Maybe not that one. That sounds a bit more flamboyant, for lack of a better term.
But I will also like gender this one masculine, right? So
There is a wide variety of voices, and having a goal can kind of help you, give you an objective. I think when it comes to a goal voice or having a voice of your own, you kind of have, for a goal voice, you kind of have to do a voice breakdown, like what's the pitch they're using, what's the intonation, is their voice more breathy leaning, is their voice more creaky leaning, is it a mix of both, do they modulate their loudness a lot when they speak, do they modulate their weight, do they have like a generally thicker femme voice or a generally thinner femme voice, and it's a lot of like little components that you're going to want to break down. And I think here focusing on like singular aspects of one's voice can help. Like, I would say first, try to just go for the voice. If it doesn't work, then look at the smaller components and see how you can adapt your voice, because then you can do a breakdown of your own voice and then see, this is what I'm doing, this is what is wrong, this one is right, I don't need to focus on pitch is fine. Generally, we are pretty good at mimicking pitch if we know, if we use our voices or if we're like musically inclined. But yeah, I totally strayed away from the question, didn't I? But yeah, it's a wide answer. So Jessa probably has her own answer.
Yeah. So the way I usually approach it is like, first of all, if somebody comes in and they've got like a very specific voice and they're like, I want to sound like such and such. First thing I always tell them is, I might not be able to do that for you, right? Just based on pure physiological constraints, some people very likely won't be able to perfectly one-to-one mimic someone else's voice, right? There's billions of us on the planet. Variation is so extreme. There's voices that I'm probably never going to be able to mimic one-to-one, right? So I always like to emphasize that I can help you find the qualities of that person's voice, right? I can help you take on that sort of tonality, but I'm probably not going to be able to help you mimic them. So mimicry should never be the goal, at least to start, right? It should always be about taking on these new qualities of voice that we might not be familiar with, that we're trying to understand and experiment with. Kind of like what you were saying, Savvy, just taking things on a one-by-one sort of deconstructivist approach to these different vocal qualities, right? Trying to figure out, what is this person's vocal weight, right? What is their pitch? What sort of vocal mannerisms do they have, right? What's their prosodic patterning like? That sort of stuff. Taking into account their accent, right? What region are they from? How are they using their voice in that context? And really just trying to analyze stuff on a deeper level to get an appreciation for all of this variation, and then trying to integrate some of that variation into your own voice, but always with the expectation that you're trying to take in just like a certain component, an element of voice, not that person's voice as a complete collective unit, right? Now, obviously, there are people who can do perfect one-to-one mimicries of certain sounds and certain voices, and if that's you, I'm not going to say that that's a bad thing, right? I've got a ton of different voices that I do mimicry for, and that I can like nearly one-to-one, occupy that same space, but it's not really the point of voice training, right? We want to develop our voice to become, at least most of us, our own individual, not to become like, someone who just sounds like some other individual. But again, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you want, go for it. But just know that it might not happen. At least it might not initially happen, right? Mimicry is tough. So that's usually how I approach that sort of stuff, is like, yeah, don't focus too hard on mimicry. Focus instead on understanding the components and how this all functions together to give that person the voice that you like, and then take in those qualities as best you can.
Broken down into raw components and setting expectations. I mean, yeah, I would say that's a good way to frame
exactly.
it. How would you handle then if you have, not necessarily someone who comes in with like a, steadfast goal voice and stuff, but someone who, even working with them over time, like they're frustrated or disappointed, or they feel like they're not making progress in that line? Like, what do you do? How do you work with someone like that? Be it like encouragement or exploration of different techniques, or...
Yeah, for frustration, usually what I tend to deal with the most in terms of that is just like a seeming lack of progression. And in that case, I usually really like to emphasize how this is a process, how stuff does develop, in some cases quite slowly, right? While I was able to develop my speaking voice rather quickly, it took me a good like 2.5 years to fully develop my singing voice to a point where I felt comfortable using it in public. And even still, I'm not done developing my singing voice. There is a ton of stuff that I'm actively working on, and that I'm probably not going to be done for a while, right? It's a process. It's a continuation of stuff. Like it never ends. Like I'm sure Savvy will agree to this too. Like voice exploration
never ends.
never ends.
Never ends.
There's always something new to learn and to look at. And there's always going to be something that catches you and struggles you. For example, like something that I've been struggling with my entire life is je suis une francophone. Je peux parler en français. J'étais dans les maisons tardives depuis la 6e année. For those of you who don't speak French, I said I can speak French. I'm francophone. I was in French immersion from like grade 6. So I've been doing this for a long time, speaking French. But I cannot make the French sound, the uvular trill. I cannot do that. I'm going to try, and Savvy's probably going to be able to do it way better than me after, but the it always comes out more like a fricative, like a Can you do the trill for me?
Je te ferai pas l'affront de faire le R.
Or taking French and I can't do it either. It's rough.
Okay. Well, that's one that I can't do. And, you know, it's a sound, like it's a phoneme in French. And it's so embarrassing to be like, oh, je suis francophone, mais je peux pas faire le R. Yeah, it passes enough. It's the fricative still, but
it's pretty difficult.
But it's that sort of stuff, right? It's, yeah, just being okay with struggling with something, right? Like not letting one specific little thing you don't get ruin your ability to see the whole picture, right? Because everybody learns things at different paces. Everybody struggles with certain things, and how long you're going to struggle with it for, it differs from person to person. I can still speak French despite not being able to perfectly recreate that sound, right? I can use something else to approximate it, that fricative. And for people who might be struggling with certain other aspects of voice, I want you to really think about taking stock in the stuff that you can do, the stuff that you are good at, right? And being able to think about, well, if I can't fully get this one yet, is there some other way I could temporarily try to approximate it? It's probably not going to sound perfect, but will it make me feel better than I currently do now, right? Or like really just looking for those little wins and being like, even if it's not at a stage yet where I can use this day to day, can I still modulate this sound in a specific way where I can very clearly see or hear that it's changing, right? Maybe listening back to a clip of yourself and compare it with somebody else's voice that you like. Maybe look at your voice in like a spectrogram or something and see objectively, did I make some kind of change here that's like, I can see it and I can analyze it and I can be like, okay, I might not be able to hear it, but I can clearly see that that was an improvement, right? That sort of stuff. That's how I usually start to look at that sort of stuff. And then also doing a psychology minor and working with a few other like proper therapists to get like good therapeutic techniques for helping de-escalate situations like that. So working on like a lot of stuff like that. So like focus on like maybe breathing for a second. If you're becoming overwhelmed, right? Draw your attention to something else. Do a couple nice deep breaths in, count down from 5, right? Try and count out things in your room. Look for something like, are there like 5 orange objects in this room that I can see? Are there like 6 purple objects that I can point to and count out? Like just look at what's going on outside, right? Distract yourself and try and recenter your mind, right? Maybe do some stretching, right? That sort of stuff. Something to just occupy that space, to give yourself that time and that recognition to let yourself kind of refocus, recenter. It's okay, right? We all have moments where things just get like out of hand and we just need to kind of recuperate from it, and that's totally fine, right? So kind of a combination of that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. You're talking about like grounding techniques, like, you know, like breathe in, breathe out, think about your breathing, all that stuff. And it reminded me, like, I have a recent student of mine who's like, she gets very stressed. Like she is she's extremely like a really mean critic to her own voice. And so she can only like, you know, keep her focus or, you know, keep it together for like 15 minutes at a time. And so I'm like, you know what? get like a 1-minute break, pet the cat, she comes back, and then we're fine, and we just do that. So eventually the cat moved closer and closer to the desk, you know. I'm like, you're petting the cat? Yeah, the cat is here. I'm like, oh, that's good. That makes practicing faster. But like aside of grounding techniques, I think like I don't know. It's so difficult, right? Jessa, I'm sure you also do, but in our community, we have a lot of neurodivergent people, right? Minorities tend to be with minorities. And so for a lot of us, you know, we can get an extremely easy time or a really difficult time when it comes to voice. So it's important to like know what we're working with, right? Like some of us have a social battery, some of us have like a focus battery, right? I think it's called ADHD, something like that, right? A very unknown phenomenon, of course. Yeah, totally new thing. And totally not a victim of this myself, of course. But yeah, you know, like work around your limitations. At the end of the day, it's a marathon, not a sprint. You can do it. Another thing I wanted to say is like, in a way, even if it was really difficult for me, I've been somewhat, you know, lucky to have the space to practice my voice. And a lot of people that I work with don't have the space to practice their voices, rather like for reasons that are their own, but like whether it's family at home or it's friends, or if your house is not well isolated enough or like soundproofed enough. I had that issue at the start of my voice training. It was incredibly hard, you know? So I think there's a lot of like mindset change as well, right? Like a voice is just sound. If you get down to it, push it to the absurd, it's just little flaps of flesh that vibrate and they create a sound. And then it makes a vibration that compresses the air, and then it vibrates and makes an electrical signal, and that's a signal transmitted to your ears. It's also weird, and it's also nonsensical, right? It's just a sound. And for a lot of people who are extremely strong critics of their voices, they very often, more than not, have a very strong binary construction of gender. And so if their voices don't sound perfectly femme like this, they might see this voice as masculine.
If their voices don't sound perfectly masculine like this, they might feel like this one is not a masculine voice.
You know, and there's a lot of that, you know. So dysphoria is often our biggest enemy. I know for some it isn't, and for that you are lucky. So get to work. You have no excuse. But yeah, know your limitations. Know that with time you can achieve anything. And Jessa, even you could achieve the R. I mean, I achieved a non-humanly possible sound. This thing here, or like. So like, who would do that in their right mind? Who would like do sounds like that? Or like a, no one does that, right? So, okay, it took me almost a year to learn that sound, okay? But that's beside the point. So, you can learn anything. So yeah, don't give up.
Yeah, definitely. You know, don't give up, and I'm sure sometimes it can get a little bit like emotionally, like, you know, I have a student who's really struggling and can't seem to move past it. And Jessa, you kind of touched on a key word, slightly unrelated, but with your French comment, like you were, okay, you can't make a sound, but you can pass, like you have passable speaking French. And obviously, I'm sure there's a good portion of our community who focus not necessarily on even a specific voice or anything, but being able to pass with their voice. And I'm curious what the two of you kind of think of that concept in general. Savvy, I know you definitely emphasize like that lower range, like femme voices, for example, can still be feminine in passing, and so
absolutely, yeah. It's yeah, to each their own. What's your goal? What's your yeah, I don't know what to say to this. I feel like it's bleeding a bit from like that other question, so like I don't know what else to add on this, but I don't know. Maybe Jessa, you have something to say to this?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I would just say, like, listen to my voice. Like, y'all probably pick this up pretty quickly. Like, I do not have, like, the brimming, like, perfect example of a hyper femme voice, right? My voice is, like, crazy low on the end of the femme spectrum. But, like, it still sounds good enough, right? Like, it fits the context. My biggest thing to say is, like, this is very true. Like, speaking of context, is culturally. What are the societal expectations for voices in the culture you're in? And how does that differ from the cultural expectations of the people that you're talking with, that you're working with, that you're learning from, right? Because cultural expectations for like voice gender, they're very different. Right? A lot of it has to do with prosodic qualities, things like the pitch you talk at, the speed or the rhythm of your cadence, right? The word choice that you have, right? All of that comes down into factoring into a voice and respect to, I'll put it in quotes here, passing. There is no true one specific binary for a voice gender. And you need to be able to figure out what that sort of like continuum is within your context, right? Within that culture, and whether or not you think you fit in that. Because it's okay if you don't, right? Your goal voice might be more akin to somebody else's voice that would pass in culture A, but not in culture B, right? For example, some British voices, right? Brits tend to have quite dark sounding voices. That might not pass in like certain Asian countries where they have really high brightness calibers for like femme voices and very dark calibers for masc voices, right? A dark femme voice from a British culture might not fly as easily in Japan, right? It's all culturally relevant and culturally contextual. So taking that sort of stuff into account, knowing that if your voice might not pass to person A, that doesn't mean it doesn't pass to person B, and that's okay, because the way that people interpret sound is different, right? The way people produce sound and the expectations around that production and perception are different. And so just be kind to yourself, right? As you're exploring this stuff, know that there is no one true definitive solution, that voice is a spectrum, it's a continuum. You just need to play around with it to see where you feel you personally fly or like slot in best on that continuum, right? And yeah, be okay with the idea that you're never going to fully pass, because nobody does, not even cis people do, right? Everybody at some point in their life is probably going to get misgendered, especially over the phone. Phones are so bad for this because phones do not emphasize the entire spectrum of a speech sound. They really hyper focus to like that sort of like 1,000 hertz to like 5,000 hertz frequency spectrum. But if you've been to any of our sessions, you know the voice is a continuum that expands infinitely. The sound frequency spectrum we produce goes beyond the range of human hearing. So to emphasize that shallow sort of area, it gives us enough quality to understand speech, but not enough quality to always accurately infer gender, right? So yeah, just be comfortable with the kind of weirdness that voice is. As Savvy was saying earlier, voice is, it's weird. So just being
Voice is
okay with
weird.
it being weird.
Are you saying gender is culturally constructed and different in different places in the world? Wow.
No one would ever
Imagine
say
the
that.
process. Imagine if they made like a culture where like there is a third gender or four. Poof, incredible.
Not possible. That can't be.
Not possible.
Not possible.
But I do have something to say is when I use my voice, because I live in a French-speaking country, I am French, just like Jessa. Je suis francophone with the taunting you with my with my phoneme. But I remember precisely because I use my voice only online. I was not going out. I'm not someone who goes out a lot. And so I was using my femme voice in front of my mother. And I'm like, oui, bon, alors voilà, je travaille ma voix depuis un moment. I'm working on my voice for a little time. And she's like, it sounds extremely femme, but like, it does not sound femme. Like, you don't sound French. And I'm like, but I'm speaking French, Mom. What do you mean? And then I understood that, like, I had hyper feminized my voice, like, to the point of like what like a Cali girl would sound like in the public opinion of what a Californian girl voice sounds like, right? And during my first year of teaching, actually, I used to do my lessons like this. I actually used to talk like that, believe it or not. And it's by working and using my voice more that I realized that this just didn't fit me in terms of personality. And I just felt more comfortable doing a voice like that. And it took time to realize that this is me. This is also me, but just like a funnier, like younger version. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Voice is weird. Voice is strange. Yeah. It's just some tubes that make some strange sounds.
Yeah, I also
It's
did
true,
that.
yeah.
When I first started teaching, I also taught with like this
Yep.
incredibly bright, super, super femme voice. And then I was just like, well, that's not what I am. That's not the person I want to portray, right? It's not me. So you just kind of like eventually figure out your path that way too. Like it's not a one and done. Even once you think you're done, you're like we were saying earlier, you're probably not done.
We're constantly growing and changing as a person, so definitely
Trying to go out the gate super feminine and being.
no, okay, that's not gonna work. You're like growing
no,
into yourself
exactly.
over time. And I've been focusing a lot with my questions on like the struggles, the challenges that students have and whatnot when coming and teaching and stuff. So I kind of want to take being conscious at the time. I want to kind of end on a little bit of an upswing and ask a couple more like lighthearted questions. Savvy emphasizing like the silly sounds, especially in the field of beatboxing. Are there any like weird, like in particular, like I'll say weird, but like weird or interesting like sounds or vocal quirks that either of you two like particularly like in voice, be it like a prominent voice or just an interesting technique or something that you find fun or silly?
Voice is just fun as a whole, so it's hard to pinpoint one thing. Do you have one in mind, Jessa?
Oh boy, do I ever. I immediately know what my answer is, and that is ingressive speech. I love
yes.
ingressive speech. So for those of you who don't know, when we make sounds, we have the potential to make a sound by expelling air or by pulling air in. So
Yes.
standard speech for most countries and most languages is what we call pulmonic egressive. That means it's derived from the lungs moving air out of the body. But we can also have pulmonic ingressive, which is when
I'm
you're
so
drawing
glad
air
you can do
into
this
the
as
lungs
well.
like that.
Oh goodness!
Yeah. And then there's a bunch of other different types of ingressive versus egressive sounds, right? You have your click sounds, which are, like that sort of sound, or like, right? Those ones are also ingressive. And then you can also have like your, right, your sort of like your ejectives, which are egressive. Again, you're moving that air out, but it's not being moved from the lungs, right? In the case of the clicks, it's being moved within the mouth, and in the case of the ejectives, it's being moved by closing the vocal folds, and then it's just like the larynx rises up and down to produce those sounds. But there are some languages, very, very rare languages, few and far between, that do pulmonic ingressives, right? And there's a couple of varieties of English that do this. In fact, even in Canada, we have a couple of this. And specifically, we're talking about Newfies here. And what they do, I think, is just so fascinating. To signal that they're still listening to somebody or that they're in agreement, they'll go, yeah, to say yes. And it's such a weird little quirk, and it's my favorite thing ever. Swedes do it too, where they'll do it kind of like, yeah, and say like, yeah, but they'll do it by like inhaling. And I love it. It's so silly. It's so weird. And I don't know why or how that developed, but I'm so here for it.
I remember I've seen some Swedes that went further from the yeah. They actually just do like, they just like, and they stop with like
they just do the
bilabial. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we French do it, although it's not. There's people who do this like weh, weh. They say like weh, like breathing in. That's something we French do. It's not something that people generally like because it's kind of a weird sound. I guess people are afraid of the weirdness. I'm here for it. I love my aggressive voices. That's where I breathe in. It's something I do a ton with my sister growing up. It's such a funny sound. But yeah, and of course there's like those languages that are like, they use those clicks. Like using like a tongue
Lots of
click instead of
African,
like
lots of indigenous languages.
very
Yeah.
much so, yeah. You probably know more about those because you actually study a lot, like linguistics over the world. So yeah, it's fascinating. I guess I could say like any beatbox sound really is what I would say is the craziest. I think a pretty crazy one is, get ready, it's the ingressive epiglottal trill voiced, or I should say the voiced ingressive epiglottal trill, which sounds something like so it's really weird. I mean, technically you could talk with it, but no one would talk with it for real. So that's a sound. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Definitely out there. And yeah, with beatboxing, oh, I'm sure you've had your fair share of exploration
Oh,
of
yeah.
sounds.
There's weird stuff.
For sure. Slightly going back to teaching, but kind of focusing on the positives, like, do you want to give, say, either an example or like how do you feel when like a student, like it clicks for them and they get it? Like, oh wow, like I have a student that's making like real progress. Like, what are the emotions there, or like how do you feel when you see that type of progress with a student, or even through classes here?
It's like the biggest rush of dopamine. I mean, like you get someone that finally gets it. My most like enduring memory regarding this is I had a student who wanted to work on her voice. And I remember this because during the first lesson, she felt really powerless to her voice. She didn't do anything right. And she cried during the lesson. And I was like, that's so sad. I don't know what to do. And then lesson 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then she cries again, but out of joy because she actually succeeded. And I was like, look behind you. Look all of this. Like I like to say, we're teachers. We teach you. We do all of the work. But realistically, you're the one putting the work in. You're the one using your voice. You're the one attuning yourself to all of these sounds. Your work when it comes to voice is as great, if not greater, than ours. We are just guiding hands and ears, more specifically. So yeah, it's that's the one experience that like still drives me today to like still do this. I had a few others like that, not as extreme emotionally, but it does happen sometimes.
Yeah. For me, it's anyone who's, not sure if anybody here has been a former client of mine, but if you have been or if you've attended my lessons, I mean, you probably get a sense of what it's like for me. I get very passionate, very involved. As soon as somebody gets something that's close to what they're after, I light up, I get ecstatic, I get excited, and I try and like make that other person get excited over their progress, even if it's, a minor progress. I still like to make them feel like that little tiny minor thing is a huge thing, because in some ways it really is, right? If it's something you've been struggling with for a while, especially, any progress is immense progress. But nothing more so than when someone finally gets it. When somebody finally gets their voice and you can just see that look on their face, how elated they are, the sort of jubilation that comes over them. It just makes me so emotional. It pulls me into it in a way that nothing else does. Like, this is the best job in the world. I could not imagine myself doing anything else. And it's for moments like that where it's just, you can see the happiness in that person's eye, and it makes you want to just, I don't know. Every time it happens, I sob. I'm a mess. Like, I just do not have the capacity to control my emotions that way. I see how happy they get, and it makes me so happy, and it just overwhelms me. And this happens too in cases outside of voice gender. Like I said off the top, I work in an aphasia recovery clinic, and I work in a school, right? For, aphasia, for those of you who don't know, is what happens when somebody, usually after a stroke, loses access to like a certain language center in their brain. If it's like, for example, Broca's aphasia, they lose production capacities. If it's Wernicke's aphasia, they lose perception capacities. So that means someone with Broca's aphasia, they might not be able to write, they might not be able to talk, they might not be able to sign if they're doing sign language, right? Someone with Wernicke's, they might not be able to read, they might not understand what you're saying when you're talking to them, they might not be able to interpret sign, right? I think honestly, even more than gendered voice, working with someone who's had aphasia and helping them learn to recover those centers of their brain, that for me is the thing that really hits home the most. And the reason for that is just like, imagine for a second that you have the ability to talk. All of a sudden, one day, you have a serious stroke, a brain injury. You wake up and you can't talk anymore. Imagine that. You can still understand language. You can hear what people are saying to you. You can make speech sounds, but you can't make coherent speech sounds. You can't produce a sound that someone else can understand. You can't write to them to help them understand. It's such an isolating feeling, and being able to help someone work through that and regain that capacity, even if only in just a little way, it's such an incredible feeling to help someone regain that autonomy, right? To be able to regain that ability to speak. the people I've worked with in the aphasia clinic are the people that have made me by far the most emotional after I'm done working with them. Nothing else compares to that. It's incredible.
That's beautiful.
It really is. Yeah, it's just strong, the power of the positive aspects of voice and being able to help people recover, or be it also exploring their gender and stuff. And at least pertaining in terms of like the voice classes or the workshops that you both offer, it's stacking returns. Savvy, I constantly hear people being like nervous, scared to come up on stage, and then they do it, and then that's encouraging to their friends and their friends and their friends. And I'm sure obviously in your time here you've seen the amount of growth we've had with people attending the voice workshops and watching the lessons on YouTube and whatnot, and it's just incredible. I'm sure you're both aware of like the scope of the work that you provide, but I think I can speak largely for the Academy that we are eternally grateful for the services you offer and the help you've brought so many people. Like it means so much to everyone. And given the time, I'll kind of tie it up. Is there say like a core theme or point that you want people to take away, be it through voice work or whatnot, given what you do for the Academy? Like if you had to boil it down to one core thing, what do you want people to take away, even if they're, done with their voice work or training, like when they move on? What do you want them to have to stick with? That might be a tough question.
I was not prepared for this question. I'm just going to say that. A core thing is, I hope you, at the end of the day, find the same joy in using the voice beyond gender, because at the end of the day, it's an instrument. Whether you sing, whether you voice act, whether you modify the gender of your voice, or whether you beatbox, maybe some of you do. And it's that love for strangeness, diversity, for all of those strange sounds we have that has brought me here, at least as a teacher, and has brought Jessa as well to become a coach. We do this because we love voice, right? It's a tool to communicate. It's totally not a core thing I'm doing. I'm like doing a whole thesis on this.
Okay.
So
No, that's okay.
But take away that I try to demystify the voice. I try to say how absurd it is, how silly it is, because our world is just too serious. And I don't think I want a lifetime where I'm just cold and serious. And so for me, voice is that outlet to do funny things and also to bring people comfort with their own bodies, that they are no longer a slave to their voices, but rather in control of it. So at the end of the day, if you finish your voice, or if you don't finish your voice, it really never really stops, just keep at it. Keep doing weird sounds, please. If you have a femme voice, and that was your goal, look into mask voices. It's too fun. It's too cool not to do. We're like the only people who can do this. And it's a thing I got from the beatboxing community, which is we're like 1%, and now we're like 1% of 1%. And so just like, I want more people like us. I want more people to be crazy and fun with their voices. I want more people to show diversity out there, because we're not meant to be stuck in little boxes. And I think Jessa will agree with me, and maybe I give you enough time to find the thing to say.
Oh yeah, I actually already had mine. I could have gone first if you wanted.
Sorry, go for it. I'm done.
That's okay. My big takeaway for everybody is to just stay curious, right? To appreciate that learning is something that goes on forever. The instant we think we are done learning is the instant that we will never learn again, right? There's always something new to understand, to delve deeper into, and to gain better insights from. And just having that perspective, having that understanding that there is something worth pursuing is worth, pursuing. As soon as you get complacent, that's when you stop getting progress. And even if you're done, right? Like, even if you think you're done with your voice, I'm sure that there's like one tiny little thing you think, well, maybe I kind of want to like learn how this functions, or like learn why this happens when I do this. Like, why does my laugh sound the way it is? Or like, how can I better control sneezing or whatever, right? Small little things like that. Or like, what would my voice sound like if I try and do it in this accent? Or like, what am I going to do if I'm trying to speak like this language and my voice is maybe not fitting into that pattern, right? Like, play around with it in that respect. But above all else, appreciate that you even have a voice in the first place, right? Think back like way back to the times when it was like humans and Neanderthals and all those other hominids, right? This only happened. We only have the ability to speak in the first place because of a mutation in our DNA that allowed the larynx to drop and reposition in a certain way that could even, allow this to happen. Neanderthals couldn't speak. Right? This is a uniquely human trait. So be incredibly thankful that even if your voice isn't exactly where you want it to be yet, be thankful that you even have a voice in the first place. Be thankful that even if you can't speak, if you have to use ASL, that you have the capacity to speak through sign, right? That you can read, that you can write. This ability for us to communicate as a species is something that no other species has in the same way that we do. We are uniquely blessed in that respect. Even other species that do have some form of a language, right? It's not the same as ours. Ours is very, very unique. And I think that that's beautiful. And I think that sometimes when we're thinking about voice training, that can really get lost in the process, right? Lost in the shuffle of wanting a perfect voice, is just even that little appreciation that this is even something we can do in the first place.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. And thank you, everyone, for attending our Getting Vocal with the Voice Team panel. You can catch Jessa helping out through the Discord and occasionally with her workshops and clinics here in the Academy. You can catch Savvy on Sundays. And obviously you both offer private lessons and other services as well if you want to add like tiny addendums. But thank you so much for attending, and hope everyone enjoys the rest of TPVR. We've got a lot of exciting panels coming up, and I'm looking forward to it myself. So, but thank you both again for this panel and for all the work that you give the Academy. It is truly incredible, and we all appreciate you so much.
Thank you, V, for hosting.
It's my pleasure. Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you.
The pleasure's mine. Thank you all.
We'll catch everyone at the next
Thank
panel.
you, everybody.
Yeah,
Have a
bye,
good one.
everyone. Have a good one.